Travis Kelce dramatically falls in our rankings while George Kittle has become the new safe consistent. It is time to dig into our way too early 2025 tight end fantasy rankings on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy, betting, combine, free agency, draft for sportingnews.com.
Today, we are going through our top 10 tight end rankings for the 2025 season. We've already done our rankings for the rest of the positions, running backs on Monday, wide receivers on Tuesday, and quarterbacks on Wednesday. So if you missed any of those shows, you can go back and listen after this one. Today, we're going to, on the other episodes, we were going 10-1, but today we're going to start at number 1 because I think this is interesting. Typically, for the last decade, basically, it's been Travis Kelce sitting here at number 1, but you're not going to hear his name for a while. Instead, our number 1 this year, it's Mr. George Kittle. Tight end 2 in total points this past year. Tight end 1, though, in average points per game. He missed 2 games. He led all tight ends in receiving yards per game, had the second most receiving touchdowns among tight ends this year. And what was great about him is typically with George Kittle throughout the years, you got a bunch of huge spike games and then a ton of really bad games. That's not really what you got from him this year. It was a lot of consistency. He was consistently getting targets this year. And after week 1, there was really only 2 dud games in there during the fantasy season. And that, again, with Brock Purdy that I mentioned during his episode, it was during the winter storm and the rainstorm. And those are his only 2 bad games after week 1. So George Kittle, I think, is the safest guy to go with this next year.
Yeah, and we talked about Brock Purdy being locked into him. He's the go-to guy. Deebo Samuel looks like he'll be on the move. Brandon Ayuk is going to come back from his knee injury. Purdy and Kittle, I mean, ever since Purdy and Kittle have gotten together, the Iowa State-Iowa combination, it's been really good for Kittle in fantasy. I think you saw some flashes with Jimmy Garoppolo, but it's gone to a whole new level here because you're right. There's that consistency where he's not just looking for the big plays from George Kittle. He's looking for the touchdowns, the short area passes as well. Purdy just trusts him all over the field. So Purdy should be healthier with the elbow. Kittle, he's also been remarkably healthy himself. Go figure. While other guys have had issues, Samuel, McCaffrey, Ayuk, Kittle has all of a sudden been the paradigm of durability, which wasn't always the case with him. He'd always miss a game or 2 here or there, but maybe as he's getting older, he's just playing through a little bit more, knowing that every game matters a lot more because, again, he's taking a lot of abuse. We're not sure how long he's going to keep playing, but we know he's still in his prime. So I love George Kittle at number 1. Again, just so many good games last year. Again, didn't disappear in a lot of games, as Michelle said. That was a big difference. So the health and the consistency make George Kittle, and the experience, make him the number 1, just barely, I think, on our list here for 2025.
And it is just barely because you have Brock Bowers number 1 and I have him number 2. I have Kittle 1, Bowers 2. So really they're tied at number 1, but I gave the edge to the veteran who I just feel it's just definitely much more safer, right? With George Kittle, because we know whose quarterback's going to be like 90%. Like they're going to re-sign Brock Purdy, I think, or give him the extension. I don't think there'll be any issues with that. We don't know who the quarterback's going to be with the Raiders. We don't know if he's going to have a sophomore slump like we saw out of Sam LaPorta this year, right? But he did finish tight end 1 in total points, tight end 2 in points per game behind only Kittle. And he did that while only scoring 5 receiving touchdowns. So there definitely is room for growth. He had 153 targets this year, the most among tight ends. But again, the question marks are who will be his quarterback? Will they add other wide receivers for him to play with that might take down his targets just a little bit? Can they run the ball better in 2024 or 2025 than they did this past year, which would take away some targets as well? But Brock Bowers showed that he can be elite in this league for sure.
Yeah, and he had some massive games after the bye here. Looking at it, I mean, he had a 25-point game. He had a 24-point game in half-point PPR. Those are pretty insane. He finished the whole point, however, in average scoring less than George Kittle. This is presuming a couple things, that the quarterback situation and the touchdowns going up a little bit will offset maybe if your target share, but I think that quarterback also figures to be more efficient if the target share goes down, right? We'll see who it is. I mean, we assume, but if it's a rookie coming in like Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders, we know the tight end is the rookie's best friend. I don't think the Raiders are going to make a big deal for a wide receiver. I don't think they can attract like a T. Higgins, right? They're not going to want to come out there on a bad team that's rebuilding. So I think the Raiders are still going to rely on Bowers a lot, get a quarterback in a system that's going to give him the ball in a lot of spaces. With Chip Kelly, I think that could actually help, as Bowers could be the centerpiece because he's a good chess piece, because he's athletic, can create the mismatches. So I'm excited for Brock Bowers. I think it's going to be pretty close, but I think I can't put Bowers any lower than 2. I had him at 1. So 1 or 2 for me, however you look at it, between Kittle and Bowers, you're in business. Then it starts to get a lot more interesting at this position as we try to figure out the rest. But the variables are in the favor of Bowers improving, while there's also kind of the reliables for Kittle, and that's why we're sticking with those guys 1, 2, and in however order you deem fit.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Brock Purdy, or I don't know why I said Brock Purdy. Brock Bowers will be 22 years old pretty much the entire 2025 season. He does not turn 23 until December 13th. So still such a young baby. Now, number 3, another young guy, Sam LaPorta. He was a disappointment with where you took him this year in drafts, right? Because he did so well as a rookie, finished as the tight end 1 in his rookie season. Then people drafted him high, and then he finished as a tight end 7 in total points, tight end 9 in fantasy points per game in 2024. That felt terrible because of where you drafted him. I will say the first half of his year was just so incredibly bad, right? That's where all the disappointment came in. He averaged 6.6 fantasy points per game, averages 3.3 targets per game from weeks 1 through 9. However, the second half of the season, weeks 10 through 8, he averaged 11.5 fantasy points per game in half PPR and 7.1 targets per game, again, from weeks 10 through 18. That's a full half of a season. Those two numbers I just named, 11.5 points per game and 7.1 targets per game, were the exact same numbers that he averaged as a rookie when we were all very excited for him. So it came back. Like, he wasn't bad the whole year. He's a touchdown machine, has 17 receiving touchdowns over his 2 NFL seasons, tied for most in the NFL over the last 2 years. Like, I think Sam LaPorta is a great pick this year, and people are going to be scared to take him because of the first half of the season.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Him, Bowers, and the next guy we'll talk about in our next segment all had big closing stretches to really get where they were in their fantasy scoring. I mean, Sam LaPorta ended up at number 9. He was actually averaging 9 points per game and half-point PPR. But if you look at that 9 number, he was well above that. He was hitting that in 6 of his games past week 8. So he was really doing his damage on the back end against slow start, maybe trying to figure out how to work in the rest of these guys. But it kind of interesting that James Williams, as he came on, it helped Sam LaPorta, because then you had a big play threat stretching the field. Amon-Ra St. Brown also in the short area. So it kind of really helped LaPorta. And basically this passing game was going through those 3 guys, right? For the most part, a little bit of Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield, but we know how that plays out. And again, you're looking for your tight end to be, ideally, if he's in the top 2 targets on his team, the way that Kittle and Bowers are, great. Then you're looking in the top 3 targets. I still think he's kind of a 2A, 2B with Jameson Williams. So he's really behind Amon-Ra St. Brown pretty closely there. So LaPorta, I think, is good in for a bounce back season, and he can do it. He's came on strong in the red zone late as well. So the touchdowns can help. The usage will help. Everything goes up here from tight end 9 to finish potentially in the top 5.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned there, the touchdowns are what have been so important for him. I mean, only 3 tight ends have more than 11 receiving touchdowns over the last 2 years, and he has 17, again, tied for the most with Mark Andrews. He gets a lot of targets in the red zone, and he's only 24 years old, and he will be the entire 2025 regular season. So I'm very excited to see what he can do in his 3rd year, and that's why he's at number 3 for us. We're going to go through the rest of our top 10 list of tight ends. We still have a lot of big names, a lot of guys we're excited for, and we'll get to that right after a quick break. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Are you tired of the endless waiting, wondering, and worrying about your taxes? Well, now that's a thing of the past. You see, taxes don't need to be complicated or stressful. TurboTax is here to change the game by matching you with a TurboTax expert who can get to work on your return right away. No more waiting for answers. No more wondering if you're missing out in deductions. Whether you've got one form or 20, TurboTax experts give your taxes their undivided attention while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on what really matters. You won't have to lift a finger, but you'll get the peace of mind knowing that your taxes are being handled by the pros. Are you ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Head over to TurboTax.com today and get matched with your expert. They are ready to take your taxes off your plate so you can focus on your day. This is only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Number 4 comes in Trey McBride. And if this dude could just score touchdowns, he would be much higher on our list. I will say you do have Trey McBride even ahead of Sam LaPorta. So our lists were a little bit different, but in consensus, Sam LaPorta came in at 3 just because of how high I was on him, and Trey McBride came in at 4. We both have Trey McBride as our tight end 4 going into this next season. And like I said, I mean, he gets all the targets, right? He gets all the receiving work after he broke out in the middle of the 2023 season. He hasn't looked back, and he was a tight end 3 in total points this year and in fantasy points per game. It's just he does not score touchdowns. 2 in 2024, 3 in 2023. Like what's the issue? I don't know, because he's getting red zone targets. He's just not coming down with actual touchdowns.
Yeah, it was just a case of bad luck. So you're right. The targets are there. That says the touchdown positive regression, fantasy buzzword term, is going to happen for him at some point. And it could be as early as this third season, right? I mean, Sam LaPorta had a season where he exploded with touchdowns. Then he regressed a little bit. It just ebbs and flows a little bit for tight ends, especially if they're getting looks in the red zone. You know they're going to come. And check out this. After the week 11 bye, he had 19 plus fantasy points. Then you had 16, then 10, 13. And then he ended week 17 with a bang. If you had him 24.3. And then he also had that week 18 where he played and actually was very productive. So he was just on fire in the second half. They kind of figured out how to use him. Maybe overall he did finally score in that stretch of those final games. So I don't know what was up here. Marvin Harrison Jr. was a big disappointment. McBride couldn't score. I think overall the Cardinals were one of the most disappointing offenses when it wasn't coming to giving the ball to James Conner, right? Kyler Murray, overall disappointing. He didn't get the passing game revved up the way we wanted. We had other guys producing the kind of the randomness that they've had before by committee versus just getting the ball to Harrison and McBride. And the reason I had McBride ahead of LaPorta, look, I said LaPorta is kind of a 2A, 2B here with Jameson Williams, where I think McBride is pretty much 2 straight up, hopefully, and maybe even the 1 really over Marvin Harrison until he can get going for the Cardinals.
Yeah, I mean, if McBride comes up with a season of 8 touchdowns, he's going to be the tight end 1 that year, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, he had 147 targets this past year. That was, and also 1,146 receiving yards, both second among tight ends behind only Bowers. But McBride missed a game. He would have easily finished first in both of those because he was just behind him. And it just really comes down to touchdowns. If he can get an 8 touchdown season, he will be awesome and be great. So I'm fine with taking Trey McBride because even without the touchdowns, he's still a very, very, very solid fantasy tight end. And then you have the opportunity for him to explode and be the tight end 1 overall if you just get those touchdowns. I just think Sam LaPorta has been so much safer with the touchdowns and he's just equally as talented. So that's why I have him slightly ahead of him, but I like both. Now, one guy that has 0 issues with scoring touchdowns, but issues with other areas, Mark Andrews, he lands here at number 5 for us. That's where he was in 2024, tight end 5 in total points, tight end 7 in points per game. He was a tight end 4 in points per game in 2023, tight end 3 in 2022, tight end 1 in 2021, tight end 4 in 2020, and in 2019. So he's consistently been a top 5 guy. The last time we saw him, he's dropping the ball, right, to get that 2-point conversion to tie the game in the playoff game, or was it to win? I can't remember either one. And he had 11 receiving touchdowns this past year. It didn't feel like it because of how much playing time was taken away from him and how he only had 69 targets on the season, 673 receiving yards. Isaiah Likely was taking a lot of snaps from him, targets, but the touchdowns were still there. So if he's still on the Ravens, he's still going to catch a bunch of touchdowns and be a solid fantasy producer.
Yeah, I don't know what the fantasy tight ends were taking. Like, did they have some magical formula after week 10? But yet another guy who exploded down the stretch. So if you had a tight end down the stretch, you were in good business here with just helping your team go over the top if you were in the fantasy playoffs and getting into the playoffs. And with Mark Andrews, yeah, this is pretty impressive that he finished as the tight end 7 in average scoring. Now, you had some outliers there that are not going to happen again. Taysom Hill is coming off a major end of his season with injury. He's older. He may not be on the Saints. He's a free agent. I don't see David Njoku finishing at number 5 again, and Jonas Smith definitely we do not see finishing at 6. But those guys kind of got in the way of Andrews finishing right up there with those other guys, Kittle, Bauer, and McBride. So this is pretty impressive, given again that he had Isaiah Likely. Remember him? He was buzzing in week 1, and then he's had a sustainable role here on this passing game. But Andrews still flexed, got his. And look, he was feeling so bad about the drop in the playoffs and just some of the mistakes and things he hasn't really made throughout his career. Like, I think he's going to be driven, focused, more motivated. This offense is going to give him plenty of opportunity here with Lamar throwing a lot, finishing with passes in the red zone. So I love Mark Andrews. Again, he's pretty reliable, pretty consistent. So really it's kind of shifting more to Kittle and Andrews more so than the longtime old reliable Travis Kelce.
I will say with Andrews, I am a bit worried about his targets. He only averaged 4 targets per game this past year. By far the lowest in his career since his rookie season. And they still have the same offense, right? Todd Monken. And it's not like they needed Mark Andrews. It's not like the wide receivers were stepping up. So I am worried about the targets going down. But when they needed him near the end zone, he still came down with all of them. So those will still be there. Number 6 comes in TJ Hockenson. He was a hard guy to rank, right? He's still somehow only 27 years old. I don't understand how. He's been in the league forever. Turns 28 in July, but still plenty young in the prime of his career, honestly, for tight ends, right? But he missed the first half of the season due to the ACL that he tore late in the 2023 season. And he didn't really do all too much. Tight end 18 in fantasy points per game in 2024, didn't catch a touchdown. That was a big part of it. But in 2023, before tearing his ACL, he was the tight end 3 in points per game. In 2022, he was a tight end 4. So he was consistently a very solid fantasy tight end before this ACL tear. I do think next year, once he has a full another year to, recover, he'll be fine. He'll get the targets. It just comes down to, will JJ McCarthy, if he's the quarterback, target him and get him touchdowns?
Yeah, I guess he didn't drink that same super serum these other guys did, because he had one good game and spike in the second half in the double-digit weeks of the season, but that was it. I just don't think he was completely right with his timetable. I mean, he came back. He was probably a bit rusty, still shaking off the residue of this knee injury, right? I mean, it's a major knee injury for a guy kind of in mid to late career to have and to try to rebound and then try to get in the mix with a new quarterback. Keep that in mind. He had to adjust to Sam Darnold on the fly because he didn't get a lot of chances while he was rehabbing that, right, throughout the offseason and training camp. He didn't get those chances and reps with Sam Darnold. So here he is trying to connect with a new quarterback with Kirk Cousins gone. Now, I think actually J.J. McCarthy could help him because it's a younger quarterback. Essentially, it's going to be J.J. McCarthy's rookie season should he be the starter and they go in that direction and they don't keep Darnold or decide just to have Darnold as a backup. So when you look at that, then I think then you'll see McCarthy target him a little bit more. I think Sam Darnold got a little bit more confident in throwing to Jordan Addison a little bit more as his number 2. That's why I thought Hockenson could have a big year playing off Justin Jefferson, but it ended up like Addison emerged a little bit. So now we've dropped Hockenson down to like 2B status, right, on this passing game order. So maybe he'll get restored a little bit more with a McCarthy, a young quarterback, treating him a little bit more as a security blanket all over the field, and he'll be well removed from this injury. So he's a really strong candidate to rebound. Again, this seems aggressive, 12 spots higher than he finished last year in average scoring, but a healthy TJ Hockenson's a very hard guy to cover.
What I do think is aggressive is where we have this rookie tight end, Tyler Warren, number 7 on our list. And yes, we don't know where he's going to land and he's a rookie tight end. But all of a sudden, rookie tight ends are starting to do things, right? It's not taking them as long to get acclimated to the NFL. And Tyler Warren is a special kind of receiving tight end talent. 104 receptions, 1,233 receiving yards, and 8 receiving touchdowns with Penn State this past year. He is the only tight end to play at a Power 5 school to have 1,000+ receiving yards and 8+ receiving touchdowns in a season since at least 2000. That's as far back as my data goes, but I'm sure it's probably all time. And he destroyed that mark with 1,233 receiving yards. So what he did was truly special this past year. And he's going to go, middle first round? And we'll see where he lands. That will be a big key. But if he can land with a team that needs a tight end, it's going to be hard to keep him out of the top 10.
Yeah, and we'll also watch for Colston Loveland out of Michigan. We'll see where he lands in the draft, and we'll also see if a certain guy on the Chiefs decides to hang it up, and then they'll need a tight end, and maybe that'll change things. But if the Chiefs lose Travis Kelce to retirement, they would be really high on this list. But right now, you still have some significant teams that could use a tight end. The two are their competitors in the AFC West. The Broncos need kind of that extra weapon for Bo Nix. They don't really have any real answers between Greg Dulcich and Adam Troutman, so they could look at Tyler Warren. You could also look at the Chargers. It is a Greg Roman offense that uses the tight end well, and we know Greg Roman was responsible for Mark Andrews there and the connection with him and Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. So that would obviously be a great landing spot because Chargers need that complimentary receiver to Ladd McConkey. Those are two teams, and I think the third team you look at is the Colts. They really haven't had a significant tight end to make a mark in an offense, and you look at Shane Steichen, he had Dallas Goedert in Philadelphia, so that could play itself up to getting an athletic field-stretching tight end. So those are the places that you could see Warren landing and having a shot to finish this high. And again, maybe we're sliding Warren because Sam LaPorta as a rookie was number 1 in average scoring. Brock Bowers was at number 2. So this is actually a downgrade from the top rookie tight ends from the past year. So maybe this is a bit even conservative for him, but Tyler Warren is just amazing talent. If you have a chance and see anything he does at the combine, it'll be special. He's just a unique athlete, very versatile as well.
Yeah, once we see his landing spot, he could definitely go up this list for us. But for now, without knowing who he's going to play for, he lands at number 7. We are finally about to get to Travis Kelce and talk through our last 3 tight ends in our top 10 rankings. But first, let's take a quick break to hear from one of our sponsors.
This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Look, it's over the All-Star break in the NBA. Now we're getting to the second half. The action is just getting started. When the game tips off, there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, America's number 1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout games. So even if you miss opening tip-offs or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback in any game, you can stay into the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. A lot of good stuff happening here. A lot of injured stars, but a lot of healthy stars as well who can produce for you in a same-game parlay along with their teams taking care of business in the win-loss column. And check out the FanDuel live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting for you. You'll absolutely love it. Whether you're backing your team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, you never feel like you missed your chance. The app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly, which is great news. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for a shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Michelle, it is time to close the show. We're almost at Travis Kelce. Not quite. Our next guy here is Jonnu Smith. What a breakout season out of nowhere for the Dolphins. This is his 3rd team, leaving the Titans, the Patriots, and he makes it work. It's kind of reminded me of Evan Ingram, right? He was a highly touted athletic guy with the Giants, but it took going to the Jaguars to put up these numbers. Oh, man. Another guy that just exploded after week 10. Just had some monster games. There was that game, I remember, I think it was against the Jets, right? He had 0 catches, and it went to overtime. and then he scores the game-winning touchdown. So, like, even in the game where it didn't look like he was going to produce, he kept coming through. And again, this signified like a shift in that Dolphins offense.
Yeah, he's number 8 just because of how he exploded this year. I don't think either of us think he's going to produce close to what he did this year. But when you're looking at this Dolphins offense, it's really Tyreek Hill, who's aging, Jalen Waddle, who can't stay healthy, and then Jonnu Smith, and then obviously Devin Achane, too, who gets the short little targets. But these are the guys, and they don't really have a wide receiver 3 at all. And maybe they add someone, but I feel like they've been trying to find someone that's cheap, and it's just not working for them. So I don't really expect it to happen with how much they have to pay Tyreek and Jalen. So Jonnu Smith still has another year in his contract. He's still going to be a big part of this offense. 111 targets this year, 4th most among tight ends. Now, this Dolphins offense was not good for the most part when they utilized him too much, right? So I don't know if that could be their plan to give him as many targets as they had. And so much of his production came in the 6 games where he saw a bunch of targets. In the 6 games, he had at least 8 targets. He averaged 16.4 fantasy points per game. In the 11 games, he saw fewer than 8 targets, which is a lot for a tight end, 8 targets, 7.2 fantasy points per game. So I'm not really super interested in him if he's going middle rounds, like 8th, 9th round, even 7th, 8th, 9th round. But if he falls into double-digit rounds, then of course, I do think he'll still give you some pretty solid games, especially if you're in full PPR leagues.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what the Dolphins offense does. I mean, I think they were a little bit afraid, right? When Tua Tagovailoa came back, it was a lot of shorter passes, Devin Achane and Jonnu Smith. You didn't have the same field stretching plays to Tyreek Hill. Maybe that's why Tyreek Hill complained, and there was some concern, will he be back? And they're still not out of the woods yet. I mean, there's a chance that Tyreek Hill still may want to be out of there. Chance that the Dolphins may get an offer from somebody that they can't refuse, especially for an aging receiver, and kind of examining that they're a down swing team. So Jonnu Smith might even take on a bigger role for this team. We'll see how that plays out. But yeah, this is dropping him. He finished as the tight end 6 in average scoring. This drops him a couple spots. So I'm okay with that. I don't know if I'm as high to have the repeat performance. We'll see what Colston Loveland and some of these other guys that are rookies behind Tyler Warren, where they might end up, and they could push ahead of him. But I think just based on what we have now and the veterans there, I think you have to stick with him right at the spot at number 8.
We are finally getting to Travis Kelce at number 9, 35 years old, will be 36 in October. We'll see if he's even going to play this season, right? But for right now, he hasn't made any decision. So for now, he's still in our top 10. He was a tight end 6 overall in 2024, tight end 7 in fantasy points per game. We finally saw the drop off, right? We saw a slight drop off in 2023, but he was still the tight end 2. So we're like, this is his drop off, and he's still the tight end 2. It was, what do you do with that? And that was after him being tight end 1 in 2022, tight end 2 in 2021, tight end 1 in 2020, 2019, 2018, and tight end 2 in 2017 and 2016. I mean, a great stretch of just dominance in fantasy for Travis Kelce. But I think it officially came to an end this year, right? And it felt like he wasn't getting the targets, and that was the reason. We were like, well, they're just trying to save him for the postseason. Like, he still had it. They're just trying to save him. That's not the case. He had 133 targets this year. That's 3rd most among the tight ends behind Brock Bowers and Trey McBride. Everyone else that had at least 97 targets, it averaged 10.5 points per game or more. And it was Travis Kelce down there at 9.2. So he really struggled with the targets he got. We saw it even in the playoffs, especially in the Super Bowl. Like, he had that big first playoff game and then disappeared after that. And then the Super Bowl dropped a couple targets, or just, it didn't seem like he really cared. I think Travis Kelce's probably done and probably will retire. But even if he comes back, I don't think it's going to be a great fantasy season.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing. It can be a sharp decline and very quick. And look, again, even his decline was still pretty decent. If you took him at a reasonable spot, if you went really high with him, then you were disappointed. But he finishes the tight end 8 in average scoring. But I think partly due to not having a great year for tight ends beyond the spot, right? I mean, Sam LaPorta slipped a little bit. We know he had a slow start, but then you got into very inconsistent guys, Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, Tucker Kraft, Pat Freiermuth. So there was a big drop-off here at tight end with the production. So Kelce, that ranking is a little bit misleading, right? Because he was still not all that effective, even though where he ranked was in the top 12. So I don't know. People were talking about, is he focusing away from football and the drops and things that were happening in key moments? I don't know about that. He's also very old, and your body's going to break down. He's played a lot of football. They were deep into the playoffs every year for several seasons, and you're just going to break down a little bit. I mean, you look at Tony Gonzalez. I mean, the Chiefs and Falcons that he was on weren't always playing that deep in the playoffs, or Antonio Gates. But you're talking about Travis Kelce with that extra round of the playoffs, basically playing every possible game you can, like when he's in the Super Bowl. So that's a lot of wear and tear. I think we saw it. I mean, Zach Bond and the Eagles kind of kept him in check in the Super Bowl. So very frustrating, I think, season overall, the way it started and the way it finished. So again, Kelce, we're hedging our bets, but I would lean towards retirement. If he's playing, then he's barely in the top 10 for me.
Now, this guy just snuck into our top 10, and this is a risky one that we're going with. We're projecting that he's going to do good things with Ben Johnson, and that's Cole Kmet at number 10. I mean, it came down to him or guys like Tucker Kraft or David Njoku or Zach Ertz or Dallas Goedert, Dalton Kincaid, Evan Ingram, like a bunch of guys with question marks too. And yeah, Cole Kmet, tight end 25 in points per game this past year, unusable, really, besides a couple games. And we're projecting he's going to make a big leap. Now, he was a tight end 8 in 2023. So he has finished top 10 before, tight end 13 in 2022. So I don't think having him at 10 is outlandish, and projecting that he can bounce back to what he did in 2023. He only turns 26 years old in March. The thing is, he just wasn't targeted this year. 55 targets this year, and he played pretty much the entire season. Jordan Akins and Austin Hooper had more targets than Cole Kmet this year. Chris Okonkwo had 15 more targets than Cole Kmet. It just doesn't even make sense. TJ Hockenson had more, and he played 10 games this year. But in the 4 games, he did see at least 5 targets, which is minimal. And I think he'll get that with Ben Johnson. He averaged 14.2 points per game. That would have put him tight on 1, but it's a very small sample size. Scored over 20 points in 2 of those 4 games. I think he has it in him to be very successful if he just gets utilized.
Yeah, there were a lot of things working against him last year. I mean, Shane Waldron wasn't a very good coordinator in terms of the usage of tight end. We saw Luke Getsy. He was fired from the Raiders, but he got Brock Bowers going, right, as a tight end. He just was using the tight end more. So there was that. There was the addition of Keenan Allen. There was the addition of Rome Odunze, DeAndre Swift. These are all people that can cut in those targets because Keenan Allen's a slot guy. DeAndre Swift's a short area guy. And Rome Odunze can stretch a field down the middle at times. So these took all those targets away. Now they've got a better offensive scheme with Ben Johnson. Keenan Allen could be walking as a free agent, so that could restore him back as a third target on this team. Ben Johnson knows how to use the tight end from the days with Sam LaPorta. So, again, everything is pointing up for Cole Kmet to be used a lot better. And this guy's an athletic talent for sure. I mean, he should not be finishing again at the bottom of the tight end 2s. That should not be happening. This guy is still very talented. He made plays when called upon. Look, a quarterback transition, but so did everyone else on this offense. So when you look at that, I say Caleb Williams, year 2, is going to be better. We had Caleb Williams in the top 12. That would suggest Kmet and some of his weapons are going to do a lot better. So I do like a big year for Cole Kmet to rebound, and he's probably one of the best sleepers already on the board. And again, this position was rather weak, and I think you'll restore some of the strength of it and be a pretty good scorer this season.
Yeah, like you said, he's probably going to go extremely, extremely late in drafts if he's drafted at all. So a great sleeper right now if you miss out on one of the top guys and you just want to swing it and just wait and punt the position. I do think Cole Kmet could be a really sneaky, great fantasy asset next year. That is it for today's episode. I want to thank you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Give us a like, review on whatever podcast app you're listening to us on. We will talk to you tomorrow. Bye, y'all.